All right, welcome everyone here in the room, and welcome also to the online viewers who will join us somewhere in the future. For the people in the room, it's been kind of a exciting and interesting afternoon. So I'm just going to have a last presentation that is a little bit lighter. So I'm going to be talking about a term that I think I coined it, developer advocate advocacy, and it's really about why we need increased developer relations, collaboration, if we want to succeed in an interoperable world. So first, a few words about myself. Who am I? So I'm a developer advocate at Polymer Labs. I'm going to be using developer advocate, developer relations intertwined. From my point of view, not a lot of distinction. It's just what you prefer. Before I joined Polymer, which was only two weeks ago, I was a developer relations at the IBC team for the Interchain Foundation. And one of the things I did there as well was I was the account manager for the Interchain Developer Academy. Very soon we're going to start, or people are going to start there, the 4th cohort. And in the first 3 cohorts, we've already trained up to 500 developers on the Interchain stack, which includes IBC. All right, so I'm going to talk about developer relations collaboration. And you might want to think, well, why do we actually need that? I'm a developer, I like to work on my own, just on my laptop, focused. But when we take a look at the blockchain space today, what we see everyone is pretty much convinced about interoperability. It took some folks, a bit longer than other folks, but I think by now everyone agrees it's fantastic, we need it. Application-specific blockchains. Again, in the Cosmos ecosystem, this was something they envisioned a long time ago, and it feels like other blockchain ecosystems are catching up to the idea. Modularity, a little bit more recent, but a lot of excitement about that as well. And so for developers, for decision makers, this is great. You have an enormous space with a lot of different possibilities, but you also almost exponentially increase complexity, fragmentation, and I think it becomes clear that we need standardization. And so when we need standardization, you can look at it from a technical perspective. And I'm going to say a few words about IBC and the Polymer stack. If you want to know more, there's different talks from the IBC Summit that will go more into depth. But basically, how does Polymer want to tackle the problem of complexity and fragmentation? Well, through standardization, and we are banking on IBC being the universal interoperability or transport layer standard. Right, so this is something that is really important about IBC. It's been envisioned always as being this universal standard, and that's also what Polymer believes. And then something it brings to it is the idea of modularity to interoperability, to basically make sure that we can outsource the heavy lifting or the specialized aspect of interoperability to a specialized chain, which is Polymer. So, like I said, with Polymer, we are kind of standardizing and taking care of the complexity and the fragmentation on the technical level, but next to the technical level, we also need to think about the human aspect, right? Developers, they're still humans, right? We also need to bridge the developer communities. There's this kind of quote, you probably know it, build it and they will come, but will they? I don't think that they will.
It's a billion-dollar question.
Exactly. So at Polymer, what we're trying to do is, we're trying to build the infrastructure to connect all of the blockchains. But if we only look at the infrastructure, not the tooling, not how different developer communities from the different ecosystems find out about one another, communicate with one another, come together on standards, how is this going to work? I believe this is where I come in as a developer relations, and where I think that it's not just about me, it's about collaborating with developer relations, not just within your ecosystem, but across ecosystems. So first important takeaway of this talk, bridge communities, not just infrastructure. All right, so I mentioned that I worked as IBC DevRels before, and even though it was only like 1 year, I was just talking to someone about it. It's like dog years. It counts for 7 years, I feel. And so there are a couple of learnings that I've kind of internalized. And basically, the first one is in Web 2, developer relations is kind of a known field. There's structure to it. A lot of orgs have it. There's even specialized orgs with teams of like 40 DevRels. I've spoken to someone. I was blown away by that because in Web 3 it's same, but it's still a lot different, right? We're a lot earlier. And some important takeaways that I've seen is, well, the first one is actually a very existential thing if you're a developer relations. And throughout my career, I've had to consistently think what actually is developer relations, because there's so many different definitions out there that even within your own team, if you're the only DevRels and just interacting with engineers, with product people, marketing people, it can be tricky if you don't define the scope, what you're working on. But it becomes all the more important when you want to collaborate cross-team and cross-ecosystem. If you can't settle on a definition, or at least communicate about the scope that you're working on, it becomes very, very hard. Another point, and maybe this is a good thing for me, developer relations are hard to find and hard to keep, right? And because they are hard to find, they are hard to keep. And that can be both in the positive sense because if you're doing your job well, you're very good in the market, or in the negative sense that people are just like overwhelmed because it's not really clear what it is, and it's just overwhelming. It gets frustrating, and people leave. So we see a lot of attrition. Another important takeaway is that, like I said, IBC was always at the heart of the cosmos. And even though interoperability was at the heart of the cosmos, on the DevRel side, what I've noticed is that DevRels still work in silos. So they are just within their own specific teams, whether it be for a chain or some more core aspect of the technology. Efforts are happening in silos. And if you combine all of these three, you can see that it is quite hard to get that collaboration going, and yet this is really important. So the conclusion to me, because of these reasons, is that DevRels is not just one person, it's a collaborative effort. And that counts both cross orgs, but also within teams. What I always say is not because you hire a dedicated developer relations that everyone else can just like slack off. For me, hiring a developer relations or a developer advocate means that in the team there's always someone who will advocate for, but who will also try to ensure that the entire team has this on the back of their mind. Not always on the front of their mind, but somewhere on the back of their mind. So second important takeaway, siloed DevRels will not offer great cross-chain UX. We need to collaborate. So how do we do it? Now, there's a number of initiatives. I think they're still quite primitive. One of them, for example, is the Crypto DevRel Group, which is a Telegram initiative from developer relations from all over Web3. Another initiative is one that I started myself, which is the Interchain DevX Group. And when we look at the mission, basically it's comes back to this point of developer advocates advocacy, which means that as a developer advocate in the world of interoperability, modularity, and application-specific blockchains, the developer advocate does not just need to support developers using the products. Developer advocates also need to support one another. So if I'm interacting, for example, through Polymer with developers from the Ethereum space and the Cosmos space, that communication is not always trivial, right? And so developer relations on each side have a job to do to make sure that that is easier, but they also, I think, should communicate with one another. And so this was an initiative started from within Cosmos, And what we're trying to do is we share knowledge, best practices, we build relationships. And I think this is a really important one that might sound very obvious, but being willing to reach out and support one another, even though there's no immediately visible incentive, I think is really great and important. So the format is we have a Telegram group, we have some monthly calls. This is perfectly subject to change, but if you are interested in this, probably not the people in this room, they already work with me, but the people watching online, if you're interested, you can reach out to me about that. I will be sharing my contact details at the end of the presentation. One more slide to finish it all off. Why am I presenting this? How does Polymer fit in? Why is this so important to me? And I think this slide really shows it quite nicely, is that Polymer wants to be at the center as an IBC router to connect all of the different blockchains and blockchain ecosystems. And so we have a clear incentive to ensure, like what we said before, that we're not just building the infrastructure, but that we're bridging the communities. And so there is a clear incentive, and this is why it's really important to me. So if anyone sees this, wants to collaborate, please reach out to me. And before I show my contact details, let's remember 2 takeaways. Takeaway 1, bridge communities, not just infrastructure. And takeaway 2, siloed DevRels will not offer great cross-chain UX. We need to collaborate. Let's stay in touch. These are my contact details. Thank you for listening.